Most men think women fall for beautiful words. They don't. In fact, the more predictable your compliments become, the less emotionally they land. That's the uncomfortable truth almost nobody tells men. So let me ask you something. Have you ever given a woman a compliment you genuinely meant only to watch it disappear, as if you had said nothing at all? That wasn't bad luck. And it wasn't because she wasn't interested. It happened because you were speaking to the version of her that everyone else already sees instead of the part of her that almost nobody ever reaches. Here's what changes everything. Women don't emotionally remember the men who praise their appearance the most. They remember the men who make them feel understood in a way they can't easily explain. The compliment itself is rarely the reason. It's the psychological signal hidden inside it. That's why the same words can sound ordinary coming from one man and become unforgettable coming from another. Today, you'll discover the 3 kinds of compliments women secretly respond to most. Not because they're manipulative, rehearsed, or emotionally clever, but because they bypass surface validation and speak directly to identity, self-perception, and emotional safety. This is the principal Stoic philosophy understood centuries ago. People are never transformed by empty praise. They are transformed by being deeply perceived. Stay with me because the 3rd compliment on this list, the one most men would never think to say, is often the difference between being briefly appreciated and becoming genuinely unforgettable. But before we get there, you need to understand why almost every man has been taught to compliment women in a way that quietly weakens his own presence. The problem has never been vocabulary. It has never been confidence. And it certainly hasn't been a lack of good intentions. The real problem is that most men have been conditioned to perform instead of perceive. We live in a world obsessed with presentation, the perfect line, the confident delivery, the smooth transition, the compliment timed with almost rehearsed precision. But none of that is genuine attention. It's performance. And you cannot truly see another person while you're busy trying to be seen yourself. The 3 compliments I'm about to share are only available to the man who has learned to become internally still. Not silent in conversation, but silent inside his own mind. The need to impress disappears. The constant question, how am I coming across, fades into the background, and what remains is something remarkably rare. Real perception. And when another human being genuinely feels seen without being judged, without being flattered, without being pursued, that feeling becomes extraordinarily difficult to forget. In the winter of 1894, a young Polish physicist arrived in Paris carrying almost nothing that impressed the outside world. A worn coat, very little money, no reputation worth mentioning. Her name was Maurice Klodowska. Most people around her saw exactly what you'd expect them to see. A quiet woman working long hours in a laboratory. Some admired her discipline. A few noticed she was attractive, but one man noticed something nobody else was paying attention to. Pierre Curie wasn't watching the version of Marie that faced the world. He became fascinated by the version that appeared when she forgot anyone was looking. One afternoon, months of research collapsed in front of her. The experiment had completely destroyed the theory she had spent endless hours trying to prove. Most people react the same way in moments like that. The jaw tightens, the shoulders tense, the ego rushes to protect itself. You've probably done it yourself. I know I have. That split second where your mind starts inventing excuses before you've even accepted reality. Marie didn't. She became still, not defeated, not embarrassed, curious, almost as if failure had whispered a secret she wanted to hear. Pierre never complimented her intelligence. He never told her she was brilliant. He never tried to impress her by praising her achievements. Instead, he spoke about that moment, the one nobody else even noticed. He told her he had never seen someone greet failure with such genuine curiosity. Think about that for a second. He wasn't complimenting what she had accomplished. He was complimenting who she became when there was nothing left to perform. That is the first compliment women secretly crave. The compliment directed at the woman nobody else ever sees. Now, here's where this becomes uncomfortable. Because once you understand this, you'll also understand why so many men unknowingly push women away while believing they're doing everything right. Every woman you will ever meet is living as 2 different people. The first version is obvious. It's the social version, the polished version. The woman who already knows exactly how she should smile, when she should laugh, how confident she should appear, when to soften an opinion, when to hide insecurity, when to look mysterious, when to look approachable. She didn't invent this overnight. She's been building that version for years, maybe since she was 13, maybe earlier. Society rewarded it. Men rewarded it. Social media amplified it. Eventually, the performance became automatic. And here's the part most men never think about. Living inside that performance every day is exhausting. Not because it's fake, because maintaining any identity requires energy. Now, underneath that, there's another version, the one almost nobody earns access to. It's the expression that crosses her face for 3 seconds before she remembers she's being watched. It's the way she stares into space after hearing something that genuinely unsettles her. It's how her hands move when she's thinking deeply. It's the tiny smile she doesn't even realize appears when she's completely absorbed in something she loves. Those moments are never rehearsed. They're real, and real is unbelievably rare. Here's the irony. Most men become obsessed with making a woman notice them that they never actually notice her. Read that again in your own mind. He's trying so hard to become unforgettable that he forgets to observe the person standing in front of him. Women feel this immediately, not consciously, not as some magical feminine intuition. Their nervous system feels it. One man is looking at her. Another man is actually seeing her. Those are two completely different experiences. One creates validation. The other creates emotional gravity. There's a reason some men leave almost no psychological footprint while others stay in a woman's memory years after they've disappeared. It isn't always because they were richer, better looking, or more charismatic. Sometimes they simply paid attention where nobody else ever did. Notice which memories brighten her face and which ones quietly empty it. Then, if you choose to speak, don't flatter. Bear witness. Say something only someone genuinely paying attention could possibly know. The way you kept returning to that story tells me you're still trying to make peace with it. You become incredibly calm whenever you're talking about something you truly care about. I've noticed you never rush difficult conversations. Most people do. None of those comments chase validation. None of them beg for approval. They communicate something far more powerful. I've actually been paying attention. That is rare. Painfully rare. Marie Curie never remembered Pierre because he admired her success. She remembered him because he recognized who she became when success disappeared. He saw the woman underneath the achievement, the person underneath the performance. And once someone feels seen at that depth, they rarely forget the one who showed them the mirror. But here's what almost nobody tells you. The version of a woman she shows the world isn't stable. Every now and then it cracks. Not dramatically, quietly. A sentence slips out that she almost takes back. A look appears before she remembers she's supposed to hide it. An opinion lands with more force than she intended. For just a few seconds, the performance disappears and something much more dangerous takes its place. Her real edge, her real hunger, her real certainty. Now pay attention because this is exactly where most men fail. The moment that raw version appears, they panic. Maybe not outwardly, but you can see it. They laugh to soften the tension. They change the subject. They reassure her. They try to make her nicer. Without realizing it, they're asking her to put the mask back on. History gives us a fascinating example of the opposite. In the summer of 1904, a young James Joyce was walking through Nasser Street in Dublin when he noticed a woman named Nora Barnacle. It wasn't beauty that stopped him. It wasn't status. It wasn't elegance. It was the way she moved like someone who had absolutely no interest in asking permission to exist. Joyce was 22, brilliant, completely broke, already convinced the world simply hadn't caught up with his mind. Nora couldn't have cared less. She wasn't part of Dublin's intellectual circles. She had no interest in pretending she belonged there either. When she disagreed, she said it. When something bored her, she didn't fake enthusiasm. And when Joyce drifted into one of his endless philosophical conversations about love and meaning, legend says she simply looked at him and told him, "Stop talking and come to bed." Imagine how shocking that was. Not because it was seductive, because it was completely unfiltered. Most people spend their lives trying to appear more impressive than they really are. Nora did the opposite. She never seemed interested in performing refinement. She performed honesty, and that became irresistible. Joyce didn't fall in love with the polished version of her. He fell in love with the moments she broke every social expectation placed upon her. That's the second compliment women secretly crave. Not approval, recognition of their rebellion. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Every woman grows up surrounded by invisible rules. Rules about how ambitious she should sound, how emotional she should be, how much desire she's allowed to express. How direct is considered attractive. And when direct suddenly becomes too much, eventually those rules stop feeling like rules. They become identity. I guess that's just who I am. Except it isn't. It's adaptation, it's survival. And no matter how disciplined someone is, every mask eventually slips. She says the brutally honest thing she's been swallowing for months. She admits she wants far more than she's comfortable saying out loud. She refuses something without apologizing. She gets angry, not emotionally, but with frightening precision. If you've ever witnessed that moment, you know exactly what I mean. The room changes. People become uncomfortable. You can almost feel everyone silently asking her to dial herself back. Here's the question. What do? Most men instinctively retreat. I've watched it happen more times than I can count. They smile nervously. They joke. They calm her down. Not because she's wrong, because her certainty makes them uncomfortable. And women notice that immediately. Maybe they don't talk about it, but they feel it. The message is clear. That version of you costs too much. So, the mask quietly returns. Arthur Aaron's work, but those few lines changed an empire. If you wish to leave, she said, the ships are ready. But as for me, the purple is the noblest shroud. In other words, I would rather die as who I am than survive by abandoning it. Everything changed after that. Justinian stayed. The rebellion was crushed. The empire survived for centuries. Historians remember the speech. What interests me is something else. Imagine the conversation afterward. Do you honestly believe Justinian simply looked at her and said, "You were brave"? No, that would have been true, but painfully incomplete. What she had actually done was far more precise. She hadn't merely inspired him. She had restored something inside him he couldn't reach alone. She reminded him of the man he was about to betray. That's the third compliment women rarely hear. Not admiration, precision. Most men say, "You're amazing. You're beautiful. I don't know what I'd do without you." Those words aren't wrong. They're just blurry. They describe the person. They never describe the impact, and those are two completely different things. Here's a question. Have you ever tried explaining why one particular person mattered to you and realized halfway through you didn't actually have the words? You knew the feeling. You just couldn't locate it. I've experienced that myself. It's strangely frustrating. You know something important is happening inside you, but the only language that comes out sounds exactly like everyone else's. That's where most men stop. Not because they lack emotion, because nobody ever taught them how to examine it. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology existed. Epictetus believed vague language almost always revealed vague thinking. If you can't describe your own inner world with precision, you probably haven't looked at it closely enough. Marcus Aurelius spent years doing exactly that. Remember, Meditations wasn't written for an audience. There was no applause waiting, no followers, no reputation to protect. Just one man alone with his own thoughts trying to describe reality without lying to himself. Not what sounded noble, not what philosophy demanded, what was actually happening inside him. That level of honesty is brutally difficult, and that's exactly why it's so rare. Most men are incredibly articulate when talking about work, about business, about football, about politics. Ask them what a particular woman changes inside them, and suddenly everything becomes. She's amazing. I just feel different. I can't explain it. The feeling is real. The language isn't. Modern psychology arrives at a remarkably similar conclusion. Researchers studying close relationships have repeatedly found that people feel emotionally closest not when they're praised the most, but when they feel accurately understood. There's a huge difference. Praise tells someone they're valuable. Accurate understanding tells them they're irreplaceable. Think about your own life. You probably remember compliments people gave you years ago, but I guarantee there's another memory that stayed much longer. The moment someone described you so accurately, it almost unsettled you. They noticed something you didn't realize anyone had seen. That feeling doesn't disappear easily. Neither does the person who created it. That's exactly what precision does. Instead of saying "you make me happy," try asking yourself how. What changes? What specifically happens? Maybe it's when you pause before answering difficult questions. I slow down. 2. You remind me that not every silence needs to be filled. Or I've noticed something strange. Whenever you're completely certain, clears throat, you stop trying to convince anyone. You become incredibly still. That calm changes the atmosphere around you. Or perhaps there's something about the questions you ask. You never make me feel examined. You make me feel like I'm discovering my own answer. Do you hear the difference? None of those statements could be copied and pasted onto another person. They're rooted in observation. They're earned. They reveal something about her, but they also reveal something about you. That's the hidden power of precision. It doesn't only communicate attention. It communicates self-awareness. It tells the other person, I've spent enough time understanding my own experience to explain exactly where you exist inside it. That level of clarity is rare, painfully rare. And perhaps that's the deepest Stoic lesson hiding beneath all of this. Real strength isn't measured by how little a man feels. It's measured by how honestly he can observe what he feels without exaggerating it, without hiding from it, and without replacing truth with convenient cliches. Because the moment your words become that precise, they stop sounding like compliments. They become evidence. Evidence that you were truly paying attention, and people rarely forget the ones who make them feel genuinely understood. There's one final layer beneath all three compliments, and honestly, it's the one that changes everything. Because if you strip away the words, if you strip away the psychology, if you strip away the technique, all three are really doing the same thing. They're making a woman feel something that almost nobody makes her feel anymore. Not beautiful, not desired, not validated. Interesting. Think about that for a second. Most attractive women have been told they're beautiful more times than they can remember. They've been desired, pursued, admired, sometimes by dozens of men. There's nothing rare about that. What is rare is meeting a man who isn't trying to consume her attention, but is genuinely captivated by who she is. A man who looks at her as though there's still something left to discover. I've noticed something over the years. The men who leave the deepest impression usually aren't the ones talking the most. They're the ones paying the closest attention. They don't rush to label a woman. They become curious about her. And curiosity has a strange kind of gravity. When someone feels deeply understood, they don't feel conquered. They feel explored. That's a completely different emotional experience. Ray Maria Rilke understood this better than almost anyone. His lifelong correspondence with Lou Andrea Salome wasn't built on endless admiration. He didn't spend page after page telling her how brilliant she was. He did something much rarer. He described with astonishing precision what her mind awakened inside his own. He showed her the exact places where her ideas had changed the way he thought. He wasn't complimenting her intelligence. He was revealing its impact. Can you hear the difference? One is admiration. The other is evidence. Evidence that someone has been paying complete attention. She remembered those letters for the rest of her life, not because they made her feel superior, but because they made her feel profoundly understood. Marcus Aurelius quietly pointed toward the same principle. In his private journals, he returned again and again to one discipline above all others: perception. Not performance, not appearances, not cleverness, seeing reality as it actually is. That's what the first compliment requires. You notice the version of her that appears when nobody's watching. The second asks even more of you. You don't recoil when her unfiltered self steps into the room. You recognize it. And the third demands perhaps the hardest discipline of all. You know yourself well enough to explain without exaggeration exactly how another human being changes your inner world. Notice something. None of these require smoother lines. None require memorized phrases. None require pretending to be mysterious. They require attention. Real attention. The kind that's becoming painfully rare. Because most people don't listen anymore. They're simply waiting for their turn to speak. Most people don't observe. They're busy rehearsing how they want to be perceived. Times. And maybe that's the greatest irony. The man who stops trying so desperately to become interesting often becomes the most interesting man in the room, because his attention no longer points back at himself. It points outward without ego, without performance, without the constant need to impress. That's what Stoicism looks like where relationships are concerned. Not emotional distance, not becoming cold, not pretending not to care. It's having enough inner discipline to see another person clearly without immediately filtering them through your own fears, your own desires, or your own need for validation. History keeps repeating the same lesson. The men women remember most weren't necessarily the loudest, the richest, or even the most charismatic. They were the men who looked carefully enough to notice what everyone else kept walking past. And once someone feels truly seen at that depth, they rarely forget the person who made it possible. The last thing I want to leave you with is this. None of the 3 compliments we've talked about today are tricks. They aren't lines. They aren't psychological hacks. And they certainly aren't something you memorize and deliver on cue. The moment they sound rehearsed, they lose their power. Why? Because the woman you're trying to reach has spent her entire life surrounded by performed attention. She's heard the polished compliments. She's felt the forced confidence. She knows what it feels like when someone is speaking with an agenda instead of genuine curiosity. It feels warm for a moment, then it disappears. The compliments that stay with her are different. They could only come from a man who was truly paying attention. A man who wasn't afraid of who she became when the mask slipped. A man who understood his own inner world well enough to explain with precision the effect she had on it. That's why these compliments aren't really about words. They're about the man speaking them. Because presence cannot be faked. Attention cannot be borrowed, and genuine perception leaves fingerprints. So maybe the real question was never, what should I say to a woman? Maybe the real question is, have I actually been looking? Most men aren't failing because they don't care. They're failing because they're too busy trying to be noticed to truly notice someone else. And the rare man who breaks that pattern doesn't just make a woman feel attracted. He makes her feel understood. And people may forget the compliments you gave them, but they almost never forget how deeply you made them feel seen. If this video made you realize that the strongest compliments aren't spoken, they're observed, I want to know you made it to the end. Go down to the comments and write, I see what others miss. No explanation, no context, just that sentence. Let's see how many men understood that real attraction begins with attention, not validation. Before you go, there's one thing I couldn't fully explain in this video. Knowing what to say is only half the equation. The bigger question is when to say it, when to stay silent, and how to recognize the exact moment a woman is emotionally open enough for these words to actually matter. That's the conversation YouTube isn't really the place for. So, if you want the uncensored version, the deeper psychological dynamics, and the exclusive lessons I don't publish here, join me on Patreon through the link in the description or the pinned comment. That's where we go beyond the limits of this platform. And if this video changed the way you think about attraction, let me know by leaving a like, subscribing, and turning on notifications.